Hey, Through Crosses family, welcome back to the podcast. We are plugging away in our Revelation series. Today, we are looking at Revelation chapter 4 through chapter 5. We are entering into the scene where John goes into God's throne room. We got an epic conversation in store for you. And so with that, let's go deeper. Well, joining us to talk about this throne room scene, Pastor Danny Strange. Pastor Danny, how you doing with Revelation so far?
It has been awesome. It's been so fun to be in this worship-centric book. I can't wait to talk about it today.
Yeah, we were sitting in Sunday, and I feel like something happened when we talked about the throne room scene and then got to respond in worship. Man, it was so powerful. And so there's a lot that we got to get to because there's just a lot of imagery, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun whenever we have these eccentric visions of God's throne room. So we'll just jump right in, starting at Revelation chapter 4. It says, "After this, I looked, and there before me was a door standing open in heaven. And the voice I had first heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this.' At once I was in the Spirit," and the story continues to describe this immaculate vision. Now, I think I've heard this language used before. I think we saw it in Revelation chapter 1, where he is on the Lord's day. He says he's also in the Spirit, and then he has this miraculous vision, this glorious vision, this terrifying vision. And yet there seems to be a little bit differences here where John seems to be transported into this door standing open in heaven. We have this voice saying, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this." And so the question I wanted to start off with for context is help us paint the picture of when this is and where this is, because I know there's a lot of a debate about what is exactly happening here. And we see, come up here after this, taking place after this, and we see this door standing open in heaven. So where is it exactly? And then when is after this? So help us set the scene here.
Yeah, the phrase that I used a ton this Sunday in the sermon is space-time continuum, which I don't know if that's related to what the Bible talks about, but I do feel like there's two questions there. Where is this in space, and where is this on the timeline of human history? And so in space and time, in an earthly sense, we see the Apostle John is on the island of Patmos and has this vision. An angel invites him to come up to see something that must take place after this. So either he's going to get a vision of the future, or he's about to be transported to the future. And so John enters through this door. And so it was interesting, as I was reading it, even yesterday morning, preparing for the sermon, I was thinking again just of Jesus' ascension and how what happens in the book of Acts. We see that Jesus is lifted up towards the heavens and then he's hidden by a cloud. And so on one hand, he kind of moves forward vertically through space, but he also kind of moves through dimensions from our dimension to this heavenly realm, kind of through that cosmic curtain we keep talking about. And so John breaks through this cosmic curtain and finds himself in the throne room of God. And when it is, we're not absolutely sure. It could have been right in that time, and John just kind of stepped into it and got to see some visions of things that were going to happen in the future. It could be that John went back in time. Some commentators believe that what was happening here was that John was in the throne room and he got to witness the moment Jesus ascended into heaven. That's when he took his seat at the right hand of the throne of God, took this scroll, and so we got to go back in time, 50, 60, 70 years and see the ascension moment. And others people believe he's transported to future in time where he gets to see the moment where Jesus takes the scroll and starts to unravel God's plan for the final destruction and recreation of all things. And so we're not absolutely sure, but what actually matters in this passage is what we've been wrestling with in the sermon and we'll wrestle with today is what do we see in this place and what is happening? So whether this took place 2,000 years ago or 2,000 years in the future, there's a timelessness to this room that we get to unpack together.
And I think one of the things we've been unpacking in this podcast is some of the first century imagery, and that open door scene is very popular. It talks about, there's this story about Parmenides. I don't know who these characters are, but these are what the commentaries say, of just having this open door, taking this figure and providing some more like information on the cosmos and the nature of the heavens, the origins of the sun, moon, stars, all these different aspects, all this different revelation. So whatever we're about to witness here is just this really, really pivotal information. And so let's step into the feet of John right now, because man, the picture that gets painted or that attempts to get painted, I can't imagine seeing something and then trying to like describe it by writing it down. But John tries. And so we'll try to capture that vision too. It says, "There before me was a throne in heaven with someone sitting on it. And the one who sat there had the appearance of jasper and ruby. A rainbow that shone like an emerald encircled the throne." So already you see this colorful imagery. You see this majestic imagery with this rainbow. And this isn't the first time we see a throne room vision in the scriptures. What are we supposed to be thinking when we hear about these jewels, about this rainbow, and this throne at the center of this image?
Yeah, I wonder what, like you said, put ourselves in John's shoes. I wonder what John is thinking in this moment, because on one hand, he is having a revelatory experience. He's in a place, like I mentioned on Sunday, few humans have been. And at the same time, I wonder if in the back of the mind, he's thinking, oh, wow, this is the place where Isaiah stood. This is the place where these Old Testament people wrote about. And so that's why it's so fascinating to me that he describes it with some of the same words as we see from the saints of the Old Testament, but with his own nuance in words, almost like he's saying, hey, not correcting anything, but maybe correcting some misconceptions he's had in his mind. So kind of like now, we're getting these pictures of what would an emerald rainbow look like? Is it just like hues of green? Is it circling this way, or is it orbiting like an atom with electrons cycling around it? What does this look like? John probably has some preconceived notions in his mind from hearing Isaiah's account in Isaiah chapter 6 and others. And so sometimes I wonder if the way that John is describing it is trying to kind of put this next layer for us as readers of, hey, if you thought it was this, it is this, but a little bit more like this, tweaking some stuff around. So, yeah, he is in a place that few humans have been, and yet I was really struck with the fact that other humans have been there in the past. And so some of that symbolism comes out even as we continue through the narrative. And
one of the throne room visions that gets mentioned as well in the scriptures is in Ezekiel 1. And when it comes to like the description of all these rainbow, earthy sort of jewel figures, you immediately start to think of Ezekiel because it gets described with a chariot of topaz, the throne of lapis lazuli, this deep blue element. And I was curious what these colors were, because like I'm not very good with jewels, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
So I was just Googling them, just like, I encourage you to do that. Like take some of these descriptors and Google them, because what you find are these elements that are just so rich in color. And eventually what you find is that actually all colors of the rainbow can be accounted for, which is pretty cool, because some of these elements appear in different colors. So we're not quite sure which color they appear. And it's just really cool to think about, man, what that would have looked like with all these different, like him trying to grasp at these jewel imagery and just the rainbow that's just emanating from this place. And I love the way you described it in one of the services about this central place, almost like this black hole that where everything goes, where this prayer goes, where these, this worship goes. It's like, wow, what a beautiful scene. I don't know how else to describe it, but beautiful. Because when you look at these rubies and jasper and emerald, it's like, man, these are beautiful gemstones.
Well, and the way you describe the rainbow deconstructed in the throne room is fascinating to me. Because the whole time I'm studying these passages, I'm thinking of fantasy movies or like Marvel movies. Doctor Strange is one that came up to me a bunch.
Thanos' gauntlet.
Yeah, exactly. So all these different, there's jewels, there's colors, but then also if you're writing a film for the screen, you kind of have to make answer these questions. Like what would it look like if time was distorted and slowed down and you were in a battle in a skyscraper when time was changing? And it's interesting to wonder, I wonder what is physically happening in this room? That is probably a question we can't answer, but maybe a physicist out there can answer. But why would there be a deconstructed rainbow? Is God just painting with all the colors of the rainbow, or is there something about what's happening in space and time from at a thermodynamic level or something where spectrums of light are changing? He's obviously in the epicenter of something. And I called the throne room a black hole purposefully and hesitantly. Purposefully because like a black hole, this is a place where everything seems to be sucked too. So John is sucked to this place. Prayers are brought to this place. Glory is brought to this place. God is drawing all glory to himself in this place. I was hesitant because black hole usually has a negative connotation the way we use it, but then also because like everything is emanating from this place. And so this is not a place where a radiance and glory is not escaping from. We do see things coming from the throne as well. And so don't think literal black hole. I'm not trying to make some like astrophysics assumption here, but I just am fascinated by what is physically and literally happening. And I'm also, as an aside, just fascinated by all of the different symbolism and descriptions that John uses that are way past the science of his time. We kind of picture looking through that sea of glass, almost like looking down on the globe from the space station. John has never heard of the space station. I don't even think John realizes the world is a globe at that point, and some of the things that he says reveal a description of something that makes sense to us now because of what we've discovered through the scientific method, that if he was just making it up, he would not have made it up that way. And so it's part of even the reality of what's happening is fascinating to me. He's trying to put words to things that his mind cannot yet comprehend. Most of these things our minds can't comprehend, but some of them his mind can't because he doesn't even know the things that we currently know. So I'm kind of fascinated. Hey, if we take another 2,000 years and then read Revelation again, will it make a new layer of sense to us now that we understand a next layer of quantum physics or mechanics or something? I don't know.
Danny, I think it's hilarious that we're talking about all these colors and we both wore black.
Yeah, we
in honor of the black hole analogy.
God is God and we are not, and so we are.
Yeah,
we are dressed not in rainbow or white. We are dressed in black.
And
today.
if you're watching or listening, you probably can't see this, but we encourage you to watch us on YouTube.
Jump on YouTube. You can see the wardrobe change.
I love the Ezekiel 1 analogy. It even ends in Ezekiel 1:28 saying. He's seeing the appearance of a bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. And I love the consistency. The first time we heard this trumpet sound and he was in the spirit, we saw the Lord appearing in a similar way that he appeared on Mount Sinai. Now we're seeing in a similar vein, this trumpet appearing. And we talked about the in the spirit motif of like, how do you know that you're in the right spirit? And it's the same appearances that we're getting from Ezekiel, we're getting from Isaiah. So I love the consistency around this. And then John continues to expand upon this. And he says in verse 4, surrounding this throne were 24 other thrones, and seated on them were 24 elders. They were dressed in white and had crowns of gold on their heads. There's been a lot of ink spilled on who exactly are these 24 elders. And these are characters that we get to see these elders throughout the book. They're going to see them wearing white robes like we see here, prostrating themselves before God in worship. We're going to see some elders speaking in this situation. So who are these elders? Let's talk about these 24 elders. What is going on with this number 24? Who are the elders?
Yeah, those are two very specific questions. What's going on with the number 24 and who are the elders? Because those are the two concepts that commentators wrestle with. There's a significance to the number 24 and there's a lot of interpretations. And there's a lot of interpretations for two reasons. Number one, because John doesn't tell us and God doesn't tell us. And number two, because in apocalyptic literature, most often the symbols are not explained. They're supposed to mostly be experienced in their gravity and fantasticness. And so, but they turn out in the future to mean something very literal and specific. And so part of what commentators do is kind of guess like, okay, who are these elders and what does this 24 represent? And so AJ, you can kind of fill in the gaps here, but some of the most common ones are, okay, well, maybe there's the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. It represents the completion of the Old and New Testament. Some say, well, it's the 24 attendants in the temple or in the tabernacle that were commissioned by God to be guardians of the temple space, which is an interesting one that is less cool than like the apostles and the 12 tribes of Israel, but does match up with the fact that what the temple is on earth is an earthly manifestation of the heavenly throne room that no one has seen. And so it would be fitting that when God is designing a temple space for earth, he would design it with some of the same elements that exist already in the heavenly throne room. 12 tribes, 12 disciples, apostles. There's also one that, okay, maybe they're just more related to these living creatures, that there's 4 living creatures surrounding the throne, and each of these living creatures is attended by a triplicate, a trinity of 3 elders. So lots of interpretation. And yeah, any other ones that you picked up as we walked through?
So if you're interested on looking on those priestly 24, you can look up 1 Corinthians 24, 7-18 and 1 Corinthians 25, 1-31, and you'll see the list of 24 different families that get appointed to these the temple and their practices. And I think it's fascinating how you call them like creatures that were designed to worship, and you should almost expect to see it in the temple, almost representing the heavenly temple. So like I like that thought. I like the thought of the 12 Old Testament tribes and the 12 apostles. Man, there's a ton of theories around this. I read some things. There's, if you take the original Hebrew Old Testament, again, this is a whole rabbit hole, but to keep it short, it's ordered a little bit differently early on. And then we kind of get this pattern of when you open up your modern Old Testament, it's in a little bit different order. But originally, if you have that original order, there are 24 books of the Old Testament. So there's something really important about that. There's 24 letters in the Greek alphabet. So look at that. This idea of completion. And then going back to like, hey, this is a first century letter. We get evidence that there was this change in the amount of guards that the emperor had. And under Domitian, he changed it from 12 to 24. And so something around the throne of 24 different things happening. So man, it feels like this 24 number is acting on so many different levels. And I love that interpretation that we can almost see how this number gets played out and how these elders get played out. Not saying that we should land on one and like die on that hill, but like just be fascinated by this apocalyptic vision that is sort of timeless, that we talked about at the very beginning, this timeless cloud that we're still learning about today.
I know, and it's fascinating to me that John doesn't describe these elders.
Right.
Like the living creatures, we get a description of their faces and their wings and their eyes. And I don't know what that means. If they were human-looking creatures or even humans, I feel like John might say like, whoa, there's humans in here. If they were fantastic beasts, like the living creatures or something from Harry Potter or something, right? I can imagine John saying, wow, and they looked like this, but he gives no description just besides the fact that they're elders. And it was interesting too. You and I, AJ, were talking about how it was funny in chapters 1 and 2, when he's talking about the messengers of the churches, he calls these human agents angelos, angels. And now he's calling these heavenly creatures a human name. Like, is that presbyteros?
Presbyteros.
That's the Greek word, which means an elder. If you look in the Bible in like 1 Peter 1, talking about the elders of the church, presbyteros, or if you're Presbyterian, you're an elder-led church. And so he's using a human term in this heavenly space to describe these heavenly creatures. And so it is a bit of this upside down world. It's apocalyptic literature where heavenly creatures are given earthly names and earthly creatures are given heavenly names. And we're here in a podcast studio trying to like sort through what's happening.
Yeah. And I love also the analogy that you used of like God having time in his hands. And, it could be as simple as like 24 hours in the day, but that might be a stretch too.
It's a big clock around the throne, and each one is
an elder. There's also this element of judgment that comes, and there's this theory in Babylonian literature that there were star gods, that there were 24 of them, and they judged the living and the dead. So I don't know. This analogy seems to be working on so many levels, and it just blows your mind when you think about how amazing this book is.
I know. And if you're out there thinking like, wait, why would God's throne room look like a Babylonian setup? Or why would it look like Domitian's elder setup? It's interesting to read the Bible through the lens of cultural analysis. We see this a lot in the book of Genesis when we see these creation motifs, like the flood epic, these different things. When you study all of the different ancient Near Eastern creation stories, they all have similar themes of violence and blood and the gods warring to create this thing. And it's really fascinating to read Genesis 1 and 2 through the lens of almost this polemic against these myth stories of these other cultures, where God is telling Moses, hey, I know everyone says it happened this way. Let me tell you what actually happened. I just did it with a word. Or the flood story. You look at Gilgamesh or these other flood epics around the world, that every ancient civilization has a flood epic pointing to something that happened. And Genesis 6 is just saying, hey, let me tell you what actually happened. This is why it happened. This is how it happened. This is who saved humanity. And so a lot of biblical stories come to refute, hey, I know you've heard it said this. That's actually not true. Let me tell you what the real truth is. This is what's happening in this place.
Yeah. So I think we could geek out on like who these are, but I think what you brought out that of most importance was where they're located and what they're doing. And so there seems to be some element of like, the centrality of the throne with these 4 living creatures, which we'll get to, and then the 24 thrones surrounding them. The author, John, seems to be painting this picture like something is happening that is just circling this throne room day and night, this throne space day and night. And what they're doing, they're worshiping. And so it immediately goes from this description of the elders to more descriptions of the throne. So we got a couple more descriptions of the throne here. It says in verse 5, from the throne came flashes of lightning, rumblings, and peals of thunder. This seems like a storm going on. What's the significance of these lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder that are happening in this throne room?
I know. I think we've talked before Mount Sinai and Moses visiting God there, which always feels like when God shows up on earth, he's surrounded by these weather events. And again, all of this fits this like epicenter motif. I've realized even listening back to the podcast and some of my sermons in Revelation or the other 2 that I preached, I use the word motif a lot in this series because it feels like that is what's happening. There's these patterns that are coming out, and this throne room is like an epicenter motif. There's a weather event. You could say that the God of the universe is like the eye of a storm. There's calm in the middle and everything radiates therefrom. There's rainbow around it during this storm, right? He is like a storm incarnate. You could also say he looks like an atom incarnate, where God is this nucleus, this power center, and everything else is revolving around him like electrons. And we can geek out and talk about quarks and things, but there's something to kind of the irreducible minimum of all of this symbolism, which is that God is at the center, and from him is emanating all things powerful that can be described, whether these most powerful things on planet Earth, glory, weather, fire, all of this. But then at the same time, to him is being absorbed all glory and prayer and honor and worship. And so we see power coming out from God and glory and adoration and praise going into God. He is this... he's not merely a black hole. He's also the sun, where everything is coming out there from.
Well, if you're interested in the Exodus motif, you can look at Exodus 19, verses 16 and 19, describing Jesus or God coming down to Mount Sinai. On the 3rd day, there were thunders and lightnings and a thick cloud on a mountain. You can also, again, go back to Ezekiel 1, where in verses 4-5, it says, I looked, I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by brilliant light. And so there's a couple of different connections there, but the throne room description goes on. In front of the throne, 7 lamps were blazing. These are the 7 spirits of God. Also in front of the throne, there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. So here we get 2 more descriptions here. The 7 lamps, which I believe we're starting to see like this motif played out a couple different times, this idea of a lamp or 7 different things of the Spirit. It says there are 7 spirits of God, and also the sea of glass. I know that was really important to you in your message. So could you unpack these 2 important symbols?
Yeah, we remember the lampstands from Revelation chapter 1, which described the 7 churches that these letters were going to. It's interesting that John and Jesus point out the lampstands in the first chapter to point out the church that's holding the light. And here in chapter, what is this, chapter 5? Chapter 4. Yeah. He's describing the lamp itself, which is the Spirit. And so reminder to go back to chapter 1 and realize that us as a church is really just a place that holds the Holy Spirit, and that the Holy Spirit is embodied in a sense in this world through his embodied presence in his people. And so we also get a little picture in these chapters, especially in chapter 5, of the triunity of our God, where Father, Son, and Spirit are together in this one place. And it's interesting, we keep talking about this atomic structure of God, or this weather eye of the storm event that is God. Theologians have always referred to the Trinity and the interrelation between Father, Son, and Spirit, this Greek word perikoresis, which is the literal translation is to dance around, almost like this picture of these 3 entities that exist as one, but are always hovering and moving around each other in 3 distinct persons. And so we see Father, Son, and Spirit distinct in Revelation 4 and 5. And yet, as we get a picture of the Spirit of God, we are even reminded here that the Spirit currently embodies this planet through the local churches, if those are in fact the lampstands that John is seeing, if those are the same things. That's another thing we don't know. But and then the sea of glass, a symbol could just be a body of water that's super, super clear. But I just love the parallel with the Old Testament passages that describe the firmament above. So just imagine you're someone who lives in the Old Testament times. You think the earth is flat. We've learned that it's not, but you think the earth is flat. And so what you're picturing is that the globe is this kind of flat plane that has, it's almost exactly like a snow globe that has this firmament over the top. And when we look up, right, we think of in Genesis 1, the creation account, the waters above and the waters below are separated. And so there's the sea above us, which is the sky, and there's a sea below us, which is the ocean. And so a sea of glass to John from this vantage point would be almost like he's standing on the top of the snow globe, on top of what we would understand as the atmosphere or something where the satellites are, and he's looking down through the firmament, through the waters of the sky towards the earth below. And so that, if that is true, it gives us a glimpse of where this is in space, that just like Jesus ascended into heaven up this heavenly staircase and then disappeared into a different dimension, maybe where Jesus ultimately landed was the throne room of God, which is hovering right above the planet. That might not be true. That might not be a connection to the Old Testament text, but that is the closest parallel that I found to Old Testament symbolism of a sea of glass.
I keep pointing back to Ezekiel 1, and I promise there's payoff for Ezekiel 1.
No, read Ezekiel, because even as we move into the next few chapters, Ezekiel, I think it's 9, becomes huge. So Ezekiel keeps coming up a ton in the book of Revelation.
Yeah, and in Ezekiel 1, you're going to see fire described a lot. So Ezekiel 1, 4-5, in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures, which payoff. 4 living creatures are coming up next. They appear like torches, all these different fire motif. Before we move on, I want to pause right here, because part of your message was making this throne room scene the image that centers your life, or that's the very centerpiece of your life. And yet so far, I've been just perplexed by how confusing this is, how like symbolic it is, how just majestic, but also just like, what in the world is going on? And so I'm wondering if you could address somebody that might be like, okay, I want to make this the center of my life, but how am I supposed to make it the center of my life if I don't even understand the half of what's going on, or maybe not even the half, the quarter of what's going on?
I know. Well, that's honestly, we've talked about apocalyptic literature, that it's meant to be experienced as a whole. And so even if I'm saying, hey, make this throne room image the centerpiece of your life, I am not saying to do that with granularity, right? Where you're driving to work, you're like, okay, so there's 7 fires and there's an emerald. How does the emerald rainbow apply to my life today? Not like that. Not like take its pieces, but take it as a whole to just say, you know what? As I walk on this earth, there is a God who sits in his throne room, and from that place emanates all power and all creation. And to that place goes all glory and praise and honor. Even this prayer that I'm praying, or these thoughts that I'm thinking right now, all get sucked immediately to that throne room. And yet at the same time, our God is omnipresent. His Spirit dwells in his church. He inhabits the praises of his people. He's with us when we gather. And so God is so infinite that somehow he is in us. So he's in our hearts, but we are in him, in somehow the expansiveness that is his omnipresence. And so that you don't need to tangibly understand how that works. Nobody can, or what that means. But what we do is realize that God is immense, God is glorious, God is worthy of all things, and God is the power center of all creation, and that everything that is generated on this earth, every idea, every building, every act of nature, every act of God, it all emanates from that place. He He holds all things together, like we see in Colossians. And so I think really just holding the gravity, the immensity, the glory of that image in our minds, and even some of these tangible things that we're talking about in this podcast, can give us some richness to think, man, when I'm praying, this is where my prayers go, that these living creatures, or these elders, are holding these bowls of prayers somehow that have become incense, this aroma pleasing to God, that as we worship God, somehow our songs on Sunday morning end up filling fragrance into that throne room. There's a connection between heaven and earth that's more tangible than we realize.
And I think there's something compelling about the idea that this is the same God that appeared to Moses in the Exodus, the same throne room that appeared to Ezekiel that we've been saying, the same God that appeared to Isaiah. And so, yeah, when you're praying, when you're engaging with this God, it's the same God of the Old Testament. It's the one who is, who was, and who is to come. And I think that is so far a title that seems to be consistently in the mind of the author and in the mind of the worshipers of like, hey, do you understand that this is the same God who controls all of time? And we are stepping into that. We are stepping into that story with a relationship with him. And so this is where things get weird.
This is where things get weird.
We get to the four living creatures. And these four living creatures
are bonkers.
If you didn't think this throne room was weird enough, this is where it kind of blows your mind. In the center, around the throne, were four living creatures, and they were covered with eyes in front and in back. I know that's a joke we often use as parents, like I have eyes in the back of my head, but this is literally eyes in the back of your head. The first living creature was like a lion. The second was like an ox. The third had a face like a man. The fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the four living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. What is going on here? We know we talked about, the confusing nature of apocalyptic literature. We know that there's imagery going on. We know this is a first century letter as well. So help us unpack this image through those lenses.
Yeah. So, easiest thing to do is turn to Ezekiel and say, okay, what do we see about these living creatures here? Second easiest thing to do is to realize these are unique creatures created for worship. And so they're also new creatures that John has never seen before. So it's like if you saw a picture of a fly at like 1000x, you'd be like, this creature's crazy. It's got these like thin wings that seem like they couldn't control this massive body, but then it's got all of these eyes. Right? So these things are crazier than even that. But it's not that far from the realm of imagination that when we see these amazing creatures created by God, that they have some of the attributes of amazing creatures here, like wings and eyes and all of that, even multiple eyes like flies have. But eyes all around, maybe there's a symbolism there. I might need some help with this one. But so far in Revelation, eyes have symbolized God's ability to see into all things and his omnipresence into every corner of the world as the flaming eyes of Jesus shine out in judgment. But maybe these eyes mean something else. Any idea as you look at Ezekiel or other places?
Oh, man.
Are you going to guess too?
No, I'm gonna make an educated guess.
Oh,
but the 2 other throne rooms we've been mentioning are Ezekiel 1 and Isaiah 6. And I think you mentioned that on Sunday, Isaiah 6. And what's been fascinating to a lot of commentators is in Isaiah 6, it says, above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And then we get to
what wings are for, just so you know. Wings are for flying. But it's interesting in a place like that. Wings are also a good tool to cover yourself up if you are either embarrassed, ashamed, or stand before something magnificent or terrified. And so both functions are being used in this place.
And then Ezekiel 1 comes in and says, each of the 4 had the face of a human being, and on the right side, each had the face of a lion, and on the left, the face of an ox. Each also had the face of an eagle. So what stands out here is that they share those faces, not separate. So I wonder if there's something going on there. I don't know. This is a mysterious thing. But such were their faces. And then here's this thing about the wings. They each had 2 wings spreading out upward, each wing touching that of the creature on the other side. And each had 2 other wings covering its body. 4 wings. So in Ezekiel, we see 4 wings. In Revelation and in Isaiah 6, we see 6 wings. But what happens in Ezekiel that I think is unique are the wheels.
Oh, the fiery
wheels. The wheels that have eyes on them, and they're under the throne. And just like you said, wings are for flying. We see in Ezekiel the set of wheels that don't get described in Revelation. And so I wonder if the context of Ezekiel is, hey, my glory is actually going to be moved from this place because you are going into exile. And so maybe one of the set of the wings becomes wheels. And then here we have, this is like the set location, Isaiah 6, this is the set location of my throne. Revelation, this is the set location of my throne. This is where everything is. And so maybe there's no need for wheels anymore, right?
Is that an interpretation that you invented, or is that one that you read somewhere? Because we've dealt with both of those types of interpretations from both of us in this podcast.
I was just curious. I think a lot of people have called out Why 4 wings in Ezekiel and why 6 wings in Isaiah and Revelation? So that's my theory. That is a theory. That is an AJ Venegas theory.
I like the theory. I like the theory because I was thinking too, just about the fact that as we read about the throne room of God throughout the scriptures, it changes depending on where it is. So this is the legitimate one, right? This is the one that exists in the cosmic space. But when Moses meets with God on the mountain, it feels like, well, God has to come to a different place and set up a temporary throne room, right? When you see the smoke and fire, you'll know that I'm there. When we see the tabernacle, we see that God is moving through, his presence is moving through the desert. They're following God like a pillar of smoke during the day, a pillar of fire at night, and God will dwell in this tabernacle when it stops and they build this thing up and then they tear it back down again. When the temple is built on earth, there's this idea that the throne room of God in the temple is really just his footstool, that it's not really it can't contain the immensity and magnificence of our great and gigantic God, but his foot kind of comes through the atmosphere and lands in this place and his presence is here. So if you go to Jerusalem today, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall is the place where you can get the closest to the physical presence of God on earth because they believe his foot is on the other side of that wall. And so we do get a lot of different descriptions of the temple related to God's place in space. And so it's interesting that as we see these different temple scenes throughout the Old and New Testament, what changes is methods of transportation for these beasts that might signify something. I don't know if the first two thoughts I had were like, are they shape shifting? Is John just seeing them from one angle? But if he kind of walked around the room, we'd see like, oh wow, this one actually also has a human face on the other side.
Yeah.
Or are there different, like every other type of animal on the planet, are there different subspecies of these living creatures? And today what we got is the ones that have 6 wings. I have no idea.
So I will give you the ones that I didn't invent that church historians have come out with. So Irenaeus, who we've been talking about a lot, it seems like he does a lot of work with Revelation because, again, he has the lineage of, he was a disciple of Polycarp, who was also a disciple of John, the author. And it says Irenaeus identifies the 4 evangelists with the 4 living creatures. So he says that the lion is like John, the ox is like Luke, the human face is like Matthew, and the flying eagle is like Mark.
I wonder if Matthew would be like, sweet, I got the human one, or if he's like, oh, come on, I'm just a person.
So another one is the 4 living creatures represent the 4 seasons of the year. So man equals fall, lion is like the winter, the ox is like the spring, the eagle is like the summer.
Are those both Irenaeus?
No, this one is not Irenaeus. This is
like, well, you can't have 2.
More modern times. The 4 creatures are the 4 winds of the earth, which we're going to see later, like the 4 corners, believing it was like a flat earth and they're kind of protecting. And then one of that I heard was like, actually these figures, and this comes from one of my professors that I was listening to. One of these figures actually represent all the creatures that exist on planet Earth. So like the human face we see are humans. The lion representing like the wild animals, the ox representing like domestic animals, the eagles having like the birds of the air. The only one we're missing is like fish of the sea.
Fish of the sea, but there's a sea of glass in front of them.
So there is a sea of glass.
Maybe there's some living creatures with wheels in that sea of glass.
And this might be a stretch, Pastor Danny, but the wings could be like, that are along the side could be like dorsal fins.
Oh, like so dolphins.
Like, yeah.
What do you mean?
No. Like dorsal fins. Like, you know how like fish
ones?
have like these little.
Oh yeah. Little flip. Well, dolphins have flippers. I see.
Because what other creature has wings on their side? Anyway.
I'm thinking about creatures now.
Yes. We could geek out on this.
Again, they could also be creatures that don't exist on Earth. But I think when you see these different, the semblance of earthly creatures, you realize that they probably have attributes from earthly creatures.
And what we do see in like the first century is a lot of ancient cherubim, sort of weird figures that have this like blend of wings and heads. And I'm thinking of the one in the pyramids, right? The Egyptian pyramids that kind of have like this lion head with like wings, and he's kind of like laying there. Or he's got like the human head and he's got a lion body. He's got the wings going on. So there's a lot of weird cherubim language going on in ancient culture. So here we go. Weird ancient culture.
Weird. Well, and it's fine. I mean, a lot of these things we see in these other ancient cultures, we also see them today. I just keep thinking about science fiction movies and all that, where when you want to make some super villain look amazing. Even like I think of Aladdin, right? So like when Jafar turns into the evil genie and shows up, and near the end of Aladdin, there's fire and smoke up in the sky. It's like that's how you demonstrate something is glorious. So there's something baked into us that understands that this is how things with gravity look. And then I'm wondering about these ancient cultures. Like, is it because they've seen spirit beings through like demonic visions and things? Or do they just have wild imaginations? This is baked into our imagination. Or is it a coincidence? I don't know.
And of course, again, we could geek out all day on this,
and we currently are.
Yeah, you guys asked for it. No. But I think the important thing, again, is not necessarily who they are, but what they're doing and where they're positioned. And so what we see is that they are in a posture of worship. Day and night, they never stop saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." And then we see in verse 9, whenever the living creatures give glory, honor, and thanks to him who sits on the throne and who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders then fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They lay their crowns before the throne and say, "You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they were created and have their being." And so we see these first two worship songs per se. What stands out to you about the way that these four living creatures and the 24 elders are worshiping the Lord?
Yeah, I think kind of like when we talked about the description of these two different sets of beings, I am struck again with how the elders seem to be, I don't want to use the word afterthought, but they don't have the primacy that these living creatures do. So it kind of reminds me again of some sort, think of like Star Wars or something, where all of these different stormtroopers like look exactly the same and they do the same thing, or these guards that exist in science fiction movies where they all have the same movements, the same words, they all repeat. There's this like legion of them. So I noticed that when I read the praise and the action of the living creatures, even though it's repetitive and it's holy, holy, holy forever and ever and ever, I could picture them as entities doing this thing, but then it feels like the elders almost follow suit and they follow up with, anytime they say this, then the elders fall down, put down their crowns, and they say this thing, and then it kind of moves back to living creatures. And so, maybe that's just me seeing something that's not there, but it almost feels like these elders have less like personality and diversity and primacy than these living creatures, just how they're described in the text. But that might not be true, but that was the first thing that came to my mind.
I think the first song is super fascinating because going back to the Old Testament throne room scenes again, Isaiah 6 begins with the same response. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. We see that in holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. And then, like I was saying, Ezekiel, the whole premise of that throne room vision is seeing the throne room move away from the temple into a new location because they're about to go into exile. And so Ezekiel 3 ends with the song being, "Blessed be the glory of the Lord from its place." And now that gets replaced with the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. Almost like, hey, I have found my centerpiece. I've not found it, but I exist in this place forever and ever and ever. And
well, it also feels like a set to the spike of the next chapter where a new song is sung, and there are different elements of this new song that almost feel like it's a tweak of the old song. So some of what I've, the part of the "you are worthy to receive" gets attributed to Jesus. Spoiler alert in the next chapter.
And I think, again, whenever you see like the "you are worthy to receive glory and honor and power," I think this is so helpful to think like this letter is political in nature. And I love that you brought up on Sunday, like this political nature of looking for somebody who is worthy to usher in the golden era or whatever you might want to call it. And, to say that you on this throne are worthy to receive glory and honor and power, you created all things, just seems like a slap in the face to the Roman Empire, like a slap in the face to any of the Roman Empire emperors who would deify themselves and call themselves God, which according to history, while he was still living, Domitian and Gaius did that. They said that I am the one worthy. I am God incarnate, or whatever you can call it. I am seated on the throne, and therefore that makes me a deity.
And that is what, one thing that that we need to understand is that there is this divine human connection where even the Isaiah or the Revelation 1 or here in Revelation 4, there is this expected who will I send forth motif of who is going to be the human agent to represent me on planet Earth. And so there is always this mediator, this go-between, where in the Christian religion, we have Jesus, who is the mediator between God and man, who is God and human simultaneously. And there are also prophets and people and even the church that embodies the presence of God on the planet. We are the image of God in the Christian religion. And so there's this really careful, like God is the ultimate one, and we are the ones who we serve him on this planet, the physical, bodily, human, earthly manifestation of this divine. And in a lot of, like what you're talking about with the Roman culture, there is a syncretism where, no, the human entity is the divine entity, and worthy is Domitian to receive all glory and honor and praise forever and ever and ever. And that's, this is where the grossest of sins is humans claiming to be God himself and receiving this worship because the worship goes to God himself. And yet the humans are these agents that do his will. And so in the Christian religion, we are very careful to make sure that God is God, we are not. And yet there is not a separation between heaven and earth that's impenetrable. We do the will of God on planet Earth, and we are his hands and feet. He chooses to use humanity to do his will on this planet.
What I find fascinating about the end of chapter 4 is if this was the end of the scene, I think I'd be satisfied.
Yeah, I'd be like, wow, that's awesome. All right, back home.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
We're done. Nice vision. That was fun. But that's not what happens. And so we see in verse 5 or chapter 5, the whole scene shifts. And it begins with this scroll that gets found in the right hand of him sitting on the throne. So I'll read it. Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming in a loud voice, "Who is worthy to break the seals and open the scroll?" But no one in heaven or on earth or under the earth could open the scroll or even look inside of it. I wept and wept because no one was found who was worthy to open the scroll or look inside. It seems like this scroll and whatever's in it is super important to John. I mean, I can't imagine seeing a scroll, not seeing it open, and then just like bawling uncontrollably. So the big question here, what is this scroll? What do we think is in it, both on outside, inside? Nobody can look even inside it. What are the seals? Why is this scroll drawing so much attention in this scene?
Well, I've read the end of the book, and so I know that inside the scroll is always the word from the king. It's the thing that's written down. That's why it's sealed. You picture any movie that has a scroll in it. It's rolled up, and then there's a wax seal with a king's insignia on it, and only the authorized person could open that seal. This one is like super secure because there's 7 different seals that need to be cracked in order for this thing to open fully. And so it's like break. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times to open the seal. So very secure document that contains the plan of God. And I wondered a lot why John weeps here. Obviously, we know there's this plan of God that no one is worthy to carry out. And so there's this despair that comes that golden age that you're talking about is not able to be stepped into because there's no one worthy on earth or heaven or under the earth to carry out this plan. There is no prophet good enough or Old Testament saint who can be resurrected who's good enough to do it. At the same time, I wonder if part of it is this personal guilt, if John's knowing this Isaiah 6 story and thinking, I'm supposed to be the one, right? Maybe that's what always happens next is that Isaiah realizes he's cut to the heart, he's convicted, God purifies him, and then says, who will go send me? Now that Isaiah's lips have been purified, he can go and speak to these people of unclean lips, even though he once was a person of unclean lips. Here, I wonder if John is supposed to weep, and then the angel's supposed to come and forgive him, and then God's supposed to say, okay, John, now you take this scroll to the earth. Not that he's playing a part, but that is how the story would go if it mirrored Isaiah chapter 6. And so even John's weeping here is the same as Isaiah's repentance and mourning. Woe is me, I am undone, I am a man of unclean lips. And so that matches. And so there's something about God has a plan and immediately realize I'm unworthy to be in this presence. And if he's about to call on me, God probably knows this already, but I'm not the guy. I cannot be this one. And it turned out to be no one was able to be that one.
Well, one of the tags again is Ezekiel 2. We see that Ezekiel is presented with this scroll, written on it words of lamentation, mourning, and woe. So there's that evidence that like, hey, this scroll is an image that's been used before, and so we know that it's closely tied to just the working of God on planet Earth, and there's like a message embedded into it. And I wonder, why couldn't the one on the throne just simply open it? Why couldn't he be the one that popped open the scrolls?
I know. Well, part of it is just practically he wrote it and sealed it in the imagery, and so
he gets to do what he wants.
Well, I just feel like why it's like you write a letter and then you like lick the envelope and you seal the envelope and you put your seal on the envelope. You're like, I'm going to open it now. It's like, well, why did you take
Why'd you seal
it with all the security? So it was written for someone else. Also, like we've already talked about with this connection between earth and heaven, God is seen to be, he sits on his throne, and he like any king brings in these human subjects and says, now go forth. Or sometimes these angelic subjects, go forth into the earth, and this is your job. He assigns work. And so God has written this scroll to be delivered to a person who is the only qualified person who can open it. And so all the seals, they all scream, this was sealed because only one person is the recipient of this letter. And right, you're going to go to jail if you open a letter that's not delivered to you, right? This is addressed to someone specific, and that person cannot be found.
Okay, so do you feel like you've addressed enough of like what is actually written in it in terms of like the plan of God? Because I know there's a ton of theories out there about like when it's open, are we going to see like the sins of humankind? Are we going to see like this like letter of proverbial divorce between God and enemies of God? Are we going to see the eschatological punishments like embedded on these things? Like when we unroll this scroll, what do we think is going to be there?
Is there anything from the Old Testament that gives us a hint, or are we supposed to be like, oh no, what's on this scroll?
I mean, the only one going back to Ezekiel is Ezekiel 2, where he eats the scroll.
I was also thinking, what's the scroll? Is this Ezekiel where there's another scroll is that the little scroll that he eats in Ezekiel?
The little scroll is in Revelation.
Oh yeah. That's the one where he says like, I got to look inside, but no one else got to look inside, and God said, don't tell anyone, so I didn't.
That's in Daniel.
So I was wondering about that scroll. Like, is that this scroll? Like what?
I'm not
What
sure.
do you think? Okay.
But all I know is that there's a lot of theories, and one of them is like, hey, this scroll was actually the one that sealed. There was another one that was open, so you can read it and its contents. So when the unscrolling happens, I guess we just kind of have to read Revelation, continue on to figure out.
Well, I think so, because I do think with all of that, it's the security of this scroll, the 7 seals of this scroll, make us think, oh geez, this is a different scroll. So we think of these Old Testament stories, and there are, right, scrolls that are just eaten without reading. There are scrolls that are peeked into, but you're not allowed to say what it is. Who knows? Maybe this was that one. But this one seems different. It's more secure. It's got top secret all over it, and it's like in 6 different envelopes, and it's in a briefcase with 2 keys. It's like, just imagine the most secure thing imaginable. It's that kind of top secret document, confidential, for your eyes only. And so I do kind of feel like we're left to wonder what is in this thing, even as we keep reading. Because as we'll see next time, as we start opening these scrolls, even just popping each seal causes chaos on planet Earth. A seal pops and earthquakes and thunder. A seal pops and pestilence and disease and famine and death happens. A seal pops and martyrs start crying out for justice. Like, what's going to happen? What's the content if just popping the seal is causing so much chaos on planet Earth, right? And then after the pops, then there's these trumpets. It's like, and after the trumpets, then maybe we read it. We'll tell you that later. But there's all of this pomp and circumstance around the scroll that, as we're seeing just the chaos ensuing, even as it's being opened on planet Earth, the parallel between heaven and earth is like 1 billion X on earth is happening for every like moment that happens here in heaven.
I think we should just start calling this Chekhov's seal.
Yeah, Chekhov's scroll.
Which in literature, this idea of
did you hear my Chekhov's gun in the first service?
I heard it 100%.
I didn't say Chekhov. I just said, imagine in a movie, there's a gun on a table. It's going to go off by Act 3. Yeah.
It's introduced in a story at the beginning or sometime, and the listener or the audience anticipates that at some point, this thing is going to go off. This thing is going to be used. Or
it has
utilized.
to go off.
It has to.
Yeah. Anything introduced in Act 1 has to go. A gun has to go off by the end of Act 3.
So we're introduced to this scroll.
Here's a literature question or a film question for you. Do you know what it's called when the gun doesn't go off. What kind of gun that is?
I don't know.
It's called a red herring.
A red herring.
A red herring.
So this is this
Chekhov's gun or a red herring, which is like something meant to misdirect you in a story. But this scroll, not a red herring, it's Chekhov's scroll.
And I think even the excitement that we're feeling about talking about what's inside of this scroll.
I know, I didn't even want to say what happens at the end. I'm like, I can't, just wait, we're going to get there.
I think that excitement or this anticipation is supposed to be what we're feeling. And it just doubles down on the response that one of the elders again says to John, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." It says in verse 6, "Then I saw a lamb looking as if it had been slain, standing at the center of the throne, encircled by the 4 living creatures and the elders. The lamb had 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth." What a tremendous image. We see a whole bunch of different things being alluded to here. We see the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, the triumph of this Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David. We see the scroll again. We see a lamb looking as if it had been slain. We see that lamb standing. We see the 7 horns on this lamb, the 7 eyes. Help us wrap our minds around this one key imagery moment here in this passage.
And what we see here, it seems to be a king returning from battle, ready to be crowned, right? This is where we talked a little bit about maybe this is the ascension of Jesus Christ. And yet, like we talked about in the sermon, there's a lot of contradictions here because a king doesn't return from battle dead. A king returns from battle alive. That's how he returns. And yet this is a lamb standing, but looking as though it's been slain. So was it killed in battle? But it's a lion that's triumphant. This is a fulfillment of the prophecies of you'll be a root from the stump of Jesse. You'll be the Lion of the tribe of Judah. It's almost like, right, if we didn't understand the gospel, we would say, this doesn't even make sense. Did Jesus win or did he lose? Is he alive or is he dead? How can you get killed but be standing alive? How can you be defeated and yet be victorious? And so us knowing the story, and I'm sure John knowing the story, it's like, it all makes sense. This is Jesus went on a mission from heaven to earth to tackle and kill sin and death to bring forth the redemption of all of God's people. And so this is what we see in the story is that no one really knows at the time. They think Jesus is going to go conquer Rome or that Jesus is going to conquer the religious establishment. And then he dies and everyone is mourning and sad. But then what we get to realize is that Jesus was actually plunging into the grave to take on his real enemy, which was sin and death itself. He battled sin on the cross. He battled death in the grave. He comes out of the tomb victorious. Though he was dead, he's victorious. And now he's qualified to ascend to his heavenly throne. And so he ascends to his heavenly throne. And this might be the moment that he does that. This might be, like we said, sometime in the future. But what we do know is the gospel's encapsulated in this image. And one of the things I'm thinking as you're reading the story is, I wonder if John was the only person sad in the room. Like, was this one of these, kind of royal moments where they're walking through the motions of they call out, "Who is worthy? Who is worthy?" And everyone's like anticipating, like, no one on heaven, no one on earth, no one under the earth, because only the Lamb is worthy and he's coming up next. And John is just bawling because he doesn't know the script. Like, he doesn't know that that's what's coming next. Or was everyone in there just so sad? And then Jesus emerges like, he's back, I just can't imagine that everyone in that throne room was like totally surprised that the Lamb was here. So it almost feels like John is not in on the story at the moment. And the angel has to come and be like, it's okay. Look what's coming up next. Now, in this theatrical event in this throne room, the spotlight turns on the victorious Lamb, the Lion of the tribe of Judah.
Well, I want to focus in a little bit more on the lamb because I think that is like a central figure that we introduced in week 1 of the series and how it just carries, I think, about 30 different times the lamb gets referenced. And this lamb is odd. It's got like the horns and the eyes. So help us understand what would have been going through the mind of John and maybe some of the readers of the Old Testament when they heard this was Jesus represented as a lamb with all these different horns and eyes.
Yeah. So, this also helps us kind of understand these living beasts. I mentioned on Sunday, there's a bit of a connection between, okay, is he in the center of the throne like he's God himself, or is he among the living creatures with all these eyes encircling him like he's a created being? We know that Jesus is not a created being, But we get this same kind of tension, like victorious and humble, that Jesus is both divine and human simultaneously. So part of it is it connects him with the land of the living, so to speak. Horns in apocalyptic literature tends to represent kings and rulership. So, a beast that arises out of the ocean with 3 horns or 7 horns represents these different kings of this empire, whatever it is. I'm not quite sure at an eyes level for apocalyptic literature. Do you know?
No. I think it goes back to the living creatures and the eyes question that we were wrestling
exactly,
with.
Yeah.
I think
go back 5 minutes in this
I do
podcast
think it's like
listen.
his eyes gazing over everything and being able to see all things. I think there's something,
which just makes, I think that's the most logical conclusion. It just
Yeah.
makes me fascinated about these living creatures and their eyes. This idea of like,
Right.
are they watching over? Are they God's messengers watching over heaven and earth? What are they seeing? Are they seeing angelic hosts around the world? Are they seeing humans with their eyes? Are they the ones seeing for God and reporting to him? Obviously, God is all seeing. But has God chosen to be all seeing through these creatures that he's developed to be like his magnifying glasses into every corner of the earth? I don't know. But yeah, this is like a science question, right? How did God do that? How does God? We know God is omnipresent. How is he omnipresent? We don't know. But
right.
eyes.
And I know with John's literature, like when John 1 opens, he's talking about, look, there's the lamb who's going to take the sacrifices of the world. And a lot of lamb imagery in the Old Testament, talking about the offerings. I know there was the regular morning and evening offering of the lamb, the institution of the Passover, so another Exodus motif. Lambs were also used for purification offerings. All these different offerings that you can find all throughout, littered throughout the Old Testament. Sorry. And man,
Well, it's crazy. We're sitting here 2,000 years later with a huge different technology, but it's like we still live and talk the same way, right? So it's like if something's happening in the world and we want to see into it, then like the news is going to put some helicopter in the sky and be like, hey, this is your eye in the sky, right? Which is able to look upon something that you cannot see. Or even I saw a news article in the paper last week that the East Bay is putting up all of these license plate cameras all over the freeway to be able to kind of stop crime and deter crime and all these different kinds of things. So it's like there's these eyes everywhere, or if you wanted to have a property and just make sure that you can see into every corner so that if a burglar comes, you can detect it, you'd put these little tiny cameras with they look like eyeballs all over the place, right? It's like, and so we're still in a place that like we can't see everything unless we stick eyes everywhere. And so when God wants to represent I see everything, he sticks eyes everywhere. It's just crazy that's maybe even at a human comprehension level, that's how we understand God's all-seeing nature. But it seems like eyes always represent the ability to see into things unseen.
Mm-hmm. Well, the lamb isn't just standing there. He does take action in this scene. And in verse 7, it says, he went and took the scroll from the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken it, it just set off this chain reaction. The 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the lamb. And there's really one more imagery thing that we need to explain, and it comes right here. Each one had a harp, and they were holding golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of God's people. Now, I've never played the harp before, but I can picture it in my head. You got this stringed instrument in your lap, but it'd really be impossible to play with bowls in your hand.
That's so funny. That's part of the limitation of writing an apocalyptic. I was thinking the same thing with the lamb. So the lamb went over and took the scroll. Lambs don't have fingers. So how did it walk on 2 feet and then reach out with its hoof paw and grab it? Or did it walk like a lamb on 4 feet? Like it'd almost be more like,
right.
It would almost be more in keeping with the genre to see this lamb walking around on 2 feet like it's Tumnus or something. The point I'm trying to make is that in apocalyptic literature, it's really hard to know exactly even what he saw because there could be so many interpretations. So, I didn't remember the question you asked. I was still thinking about the
harps in the bowl.
Oh, harps in the bowl. Yeah. It's like the harp with the bowl on the side who's playing the harps?
It's the 4
elders?
living creatures and the 24 elders fell down. Each one had a harp. So it doesn't really
You
say.
didn't even ask how you play a harp with a wing.
Yeah.
Do they also have hands?
Does the 4 living creatures have the harp, or is it
Were they actually wheels, but they looked like were they harps, but they looked like wheels? And so like Ezekiel didn't know like those were actually harps, not wheels.
So I think a better question is, let's talk about the harp and what is the golden bowl of incense? Because I think there's something there with like the worship of the saints.
Yeah, I would guess that that obviously we are told that these golden bowls represent the prayers of God's people. And so you get this image that when we pray, our prayer ascends into the throne room of God. This is what we see in the Psalms, that God inhabits the praises of his people. So there's the idea that God comes down as we worship, but there's also this idea of like our worship goes up to this place, that this is, our worship leaves our body, our prayer leaves our body like a fragrant offering. And so like incense floats with its smoke into space, or a burnt offering, fragrant offering floats like smoke into space up into the nostrils of God. We get to see how it actually physically works, that it comes through this bowl. And so I would guess that the harp represents the worship of God's people. The bowls represent the prayer of God's people, like incense and aroma that's pleasing to him. And whether that's a representation or that's like physically what happens is that when we pray, it ascends into the place and comes through these bowls. That's the portal, like HVAC ducts into the heavenly. I don't know, but that seems to be what it represents.
Yeah, the book of Psalms comes pretty quickly in here. Psalm 141 verse 2, let my prayer be counted as incense before you, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice.
I love how it moves. I mean, the Psalms, it's a simile. In Revelation, it's a metaphor, right? It is as or like the incense, and now that actually is. It is the incense in that place.
And then Psalm 33, give thanks to the Lord with the lyre, make melody to him with the harp of 10 strings, sing to him a new song, play skillfully on the strings with loud shouts. And going to the early century church fathers, Origen comes out with a statement saying, our altars are the mind of each righteous man, from which true and intelligible incense with a sweet savor is sent up, prayers from a pure conscience. That is why it is said by John in the Apocalypse, and the incense is the prayers of the saints, and by the psalmist, let my prayers be as incense before thee. Such a beautiful imagery that's where our prayers end up. And part of this song of worship to this Lamb. And that's where we'll end this episode, is looking at these final songs that we get to play out here. It says that the elders and the 4 living creatures are singing a new song in verse 9. You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with your blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made them to be a kingdom and priests to serve our God, and they will reign on the earth. Let's talk about that first song. What stands out to you about that first song?
The song you just read that ends with because I was thinking about the end of it. I want to make sure it wasn't the second one. I'm thinking about we've talked about the human agent that is Jesus, that Jesus is the one that is sent to redeem all things. You get a glimpse of that gospel story in this song, that he has purchased for himself all of these people. But then you also get that second part, which I hadn't thought about till right now, of that he makes them this kingdom of priests. And it's a reminder that there's this ripple effect that, yes, Jesus is the human agent, the divine human being who is bringing forth the plan of God for the redemption of all mankind, but also he chooses to work through the humanity that he has redeemed. So we are part of this story. So we are not worthy to open the scroll, but we are protected from the judgment in the scroll, and we are also used by God to carry out his plan that's written on the scroll. And so we get a glimpse of ourselves in the throne room as well, that obviously Jesus is the only one who is worthy. And yet then he says, because I am worthy, I have made you worthy to be part of this divine plan, to carry out this priestly mission on the planet, which is to be an intermediate between God and humankind.
And it seemed like this specific song made you think of the ascension as well, because it talks specifically about like being purchased with the blood. And so does that kind of help with like the timing question that you were wrestling with? Or?
I mean, it feels like what I noticed first in studying these passages is it seems like there's a huge hinge on the Lamb shows up and now a new song is sung, as juxtaposed to in chapter 4, where it's not the same old song, it's a glorious song, but it's the same song. There's just so much of telling us about the parallelism and continuity in chapter 4. And now it's broken with the scroll, broken with the timeline, broken with a new song. It's like something new is breaking forth. And so it seems like John is witnessing a moment where something new is breaking forth. And we know that something new broke forth on the cross, something new broke forth on Easter Sunday, and something new broke forth in the cosmic realm on Ascension Sunday, or on the day of Ascension, when Jesus steps in the throne room of God. And so that's why for me, it feels like maybe he's brought back in time to this moment where he gets to witness either the coronation of Jesus the King, or that's why part of me, I kind of wish that this happens like on the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, because he shows up as a lamb and later he's going to come back in and be crowned king. He's not crowned king, I don't think, in Revelation 5, but we see that the victory is won. He has done the work, and now it's ready to go and continue in this mission.
It's a beautiful image. It's one that stands out in my mind when I thought about your message on Sunday. Just this idea that the slain lamb is grabbing that scroll and beginning to unravel the will of God on earth. So verse 11 picks up to the next chorus that chimes in here. Then I looked and heard the voice of many angels, numbering thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000. They encircled the throne and the living creatures and the elders. In a loud voice they were saying, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." So let's talk about that second song there. What stands out to you about the chorus of these angels numbering thousands upon thousands?
I think immediately to Bethlehem and the angels that show up in heavenly chorus when Christ steps onto earth in human form in this manger. And they sing a similar song, right? Glory to God. Glory in the highest, peace on earth unto men on whom his favor rests. And so there's this idea of if it's glory and praise and honor, and it seems like the angelic host kind of comes and accentuates amazing events that are happening in the redemption of God's people. And so they show up at the incarnation of Jesus, and then boom, they show up again here at this, whatever this scene, a coronation scene or this scroll taking scene. Be interesting to do some research into like, is there an official ceremony in the Greek culture where like a scroll is delivered? Don't know. I'm thinking about the Olympics or a messenger or something or a coronation event. But yeah, it feels like that's when the angels show up, is when something marvelous is happening in the salvation history of God's people as they come to, like an amazing concert event or something where it's like, this is amazing. And then boom, the lights turn on and there's a 10,000 person chorus. Like, what? This is crazy. So it is like, it's accentuating what is happening and saying, this is a good thing. Glory to God. This is unbelievable what's happening in this moment.
And I think, going back to the songs that were sung previously, talking about the worthiness of God being the one who is willing and able to receive all these different things. Again, thinking about it in the context of the Roman emperor, just like worthy is the Lamb to receive all these different things. I mean, it's a string of 7 different things: power, wealth, wisdom, strength, honor, glory, and praise. So I think there's something unique to that. The final song here, we've made it to the end. Then I heard every creature in heaven and on earth and under the earth and on the sea and all that is in them saying, "To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." The 4 living creatures said, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. Talk to us about this closing song scene here.
Yeah, what I notice is it kind of goes from like greater back to the center again. So it's this angelic host is added to the end, and then all of a sudden now there are these worshipers from all places. And so you do feel like in the same way that no one on heaven or earth or under the earth is worthy to open the scroll, worshipers in heaven, on earth, and under the earth and in the sea are coming up just to declare. So whether that's not merely humans, but all creatures, right? The rocks cry out, or the sea creatures are worshiping God. Or if this is even those who have died in Christ are coming back and worshiping him in this chorus, which we kind of see the martyrs in the next chapter crying out from under the altar. So there is a bit in this throne room of real human earthly appearance, even those who have died. And so maybe that's a precursor to that. And so it kind of goes out to the extent of every worshiper of God from all time ever cries out in a loud voice. This is the culmination of human history, that this Lamb is victorious, and then it boom, 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 cascades back in again, right? Past the angels, to the living creatures, to the elders, and they fall down and worship. And so it just feels like a marvelous conclusion to an amazing event where it just boom, chorus of angels, boom, it's like, that's not it. There's even more choruses, and then back to the living creatures, back to the elders, they fall down, and then scene, right? The lights turn out. It's like over. It's like, that was crazy. What did I just experience?
Man, well, hopefully that was really informative to you listening or watching us. But I wanted to one last question on that final note there, because it says the four living creatures, they say amen. And it feels like there's like a finality to that statement. And so I'm interested, again, if Revelation ended at chapter 5, I think I'd be pretty content, you know? I mean, I guess there's the cliffhanger of the scroll and like, what's in that? Like, is that ever going to be open? But it seems like the four living creatures saying amen, it puts like a final stamp on it. So I'm wondering, what are we supposed to take away from this scene here where it says, okay, amen, this is what happens. And where are we going to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it does. It feels like a great conclusion to this moment. It's a culmination of everything that we've seen so far. Like the lights turn off, the curtains close, and part of us must be like, well, that was an awesome movie, I'm leaving. But then you're thinking like, wait, what? Well, what's in the scroll? And so obviously the next scene is going to be the beginning of this scroll being opened. And if you're reading it for the first time, you don't know what's happening next, right? Maybe you might turn the page in the scroll that you're reading of Revelation and the next thing is these are the words that were written on the scroll. But instead we actually get to see like several chapters of even just opening the scroll. So it's like, wow, I feel like we're about to enter into Jumanji or something where every time a seal is popped, the world goes into chaos. And that's not even seeing the words yet. That's just undoing the security system of this thing. And so we're in for, this is not the end. This is literally just the beginning, but it is the end of the beginning.
Yeah. What an opening act. I tell you.
I know,
man. Well, that's Revelation chapters 1 through 5.
We finished the opening act. And in any good film, Act 1's about 25% of the film. And so we're about 25% of the way through the book, and Act 1 is concluded. And now we're into the meat of the story, which is what's on this scroll. And are we sure we want this guy to open it?
And we were plugging away in the book of Revelation. And I think what I love about the first 5 chapters, the opening act, is there's something about worship. There's something about worship and these new songs that get sung that reorient our lives to remember who is on that throne, to remember that there is even a throne that is full of majesty and glory, and there's one on the throne, and we're given this image to help us understand who is on that throne, the Lamb that was slain. And man, there was something even that happened on Sunday in our worship set after you preached that was just so beautiful, when people just sang the song that the angels continue to sing, joining that chorus of worshiping. And so our encouragement would be to continue in that posture of worship. And again, if you miss Jesus through all of these next coming chapters, I think you've missed the point, because this is a book about worship, and it helps us reprioritize our life in so many ways. And so what encouragement would you have for people who are just looking at, like, what do I do with all this?
Yeah, I think for now, it's this throne room story has ended and this new beginning is starting next week. I would say for now, my encouragement is to realize that the chapter 4's continuity is significant, and that there is a throne room of God in place right now where God is being worshiped at all times, where every prayer that you pray enters into that room as a fragrant offering. And so you can add, in a sense, value to that place through your prayer, through your worship. I think a lot of times, especially as those who are passionate about sharing the gospel with others, we think that the work of ministry is what's most important to God. And we sometimes can forget that prayer and worship are absolutely important to God, not merely as a way to get things done on earth, but because ultimately God is worthy of worship. I thought about the John Piper quote a lot this week as I prepared this message, that evangelism and world missions even exists because worship doesn't. And so the chief end of the human race is the worship of God, not the evangelization of mankind. The evangelization of mankind happens so that God may be worshiped in full forever and ever and ever.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's Revelation chapters 1 through 5. Pastor Danny, until next time, we'll see you for the next Revelation episode.
I cannot wait. It's going to be great.